In 1960, a man named George Maciunas planned to launch a magazine for a Lithuanian cultural club that was to be opened in New York. The name he proposed for the magazine was Fluxus. When the first issue finally came out, 4 years later, it had turned into something completely different. And in the meantime, Fluxus had become known to the world as a group of artists who were struggling to revolutionize the whole concept of art. 30 years later, in the summer of 1990, many of the original Fluxus artists met again in Venice for a show in connection with the Biennale.
So we're standing in front of Madison Avenue, 925. So
the corner of 74th Street and Madison, actually, between 73rd and 74th, in front of 925, where in 1961 used to be A/G gallery. In any case, it was on the second floor there. The stairs, the entrance used to be there. And some of the events used to take place also on the stairs. I remember one of the last events was nobody could really climb up into the second floor because George kept pouring down little balls. I don't remember what they were made from, but like the balls, and it was very difficult to climb up.
To get inside, I think we have to go in and ask the people in there for...
Let's see, what do we have? Christian Science Reading Room, huh?
Christian Science.
30 years ago that was.
Let's see.
Who lives now, or what is on the second floor above this? What is right there?
Up above us,
Yeah.
there, our superintendent.
Oh, is he there now?
No.
So it's locked.
Yes.
Just a space where he has his.
Yes, yes.
There used to be a gallery 30 years ago.
Oh, maybe
Yes,
a long time ago.
AG Gallery.
AG?
A, 2 letters.
What kind of art did they sell?
Oh, so one could say modern
Modern?
in a way.
In those days, it was modern?
Fluxus.
Yeah, no,
Fluxus.
I've never heard of it, and I'm an artist.
Yeah.
I never heard of Fluxus. And how would you describe Fluxus?
Hatch trick. Find an object near at hand, keep it under your hat all day.
These are the archives, some of the documents and original documents and photographs and documentation of events and so on in the Silverman collection. And we have them arranged by events and boxes. Here, in this box, these are films that Ben Vautier had put together of some of the early Fluxus performances in Nice, and he had sent them to Maciunas. Here it's addressed to George Maciunas in Great Barrington, and it's a compilation of the very earliest Fluxus performances.
Published by Left Hand Books called Event Scores. Here is Namjoon Paik performing a piece at the Cafe Au Go-Go in 1961. Composition for Paik. Select a platform or any large square rectangular area that is set apart or raised above the room. Measure this area. Using Paik as assistant, find its center. Then drop a plumb line to this point from the ceiling. Find the center of this distance and mark the string with chalk. Build for Paik a platform up to this point so that he may sit in the center of the room for the duration of the performance.
In Europe in that time, it's the beginning of the 60s, you can say, there was a sense that the institutions were very narrow-minded. Theater was theater, music was music, art was art, and art belonged automatically in the museum, and music belonged automatically in the concert hall, etc., etc. And I was doing things that didn't belong in neither of them. You know, if I went to a museum, said there's too much music, and if the music said, no, there's too much theater, and the theater said there's too much art, so it didn't fit any of those territories, but there was nothing in between. So there was a sense in Europe, you can say, among artists that the presentational form was too much decided by the institutions.
I don't think in art games you can win the game, but you can win the game by changing the rule of the game.
My name's Dick Higgins, and I live in the Hudson Valley, 165 kilometers north of New York City, in an old church. And in the 1950s, I began as a composer. I found myself composing my music with words, which turned me into a poet. And I found myself making notations for my poetry, which got me into visual art. I also studied printing. And so pretty soon I was working with all the arts, and I kept waiting for the day when I would do only one art and focus on being just one thing. It never came, so I gave up and called the fusions of things which I was doing intermediate. Then I found that other people had the same problem, and so I wasn't alone, and that's how I got to be a Fluxus artist.
1, 2, 3, 4.
My name is Eric Andersen. I was born in London or Copenhagen around 42, 43.
My name is Emmet Williams, and I was born in South Carolina in 1925, and I lived in Europe most of my life, and I'm a poet, printmaker, performer, and something else that begins with a P. Oh yes, painter. And that's it. Okay.
So my name is Ben Patterson, and I'm, I guess, an American Fluxus artist and a Fluxus artist. Been around the game and the gang for since the beginning, 1962 at least, and before that.
I'm Philip Corner. I'm a musician. I always thought of myself as a musician, composer specifically. My instrument is the piano in terms of training, but I've been involved with all sorts of other sounds, from metal, gongs, to my own body sound, natural noises, and various things that you don't have to go to school to learn.
Ben Vautier, feeling old, 54 years old. I wonder if I'm repeating myself. My father's Swiss, my mother's Irish, and I'm around in Venice for glory, always. I should give it up, but I can't.
My name is Henry Flynt. I think of myself mainly as a philosopher working in foundations of science, but as an artist, I'm known as the originator of concept art.
I'm Ken Friedman. I'm an artist and designer. I live in Oslo, Norway, and in New York.
I've never been a Fluxus artist, and I deeply object to being classified with the Fluxus artists. Nevertheless,
my name is Jackson McLowe. I'm a writer of poems, plays, prose work, and other kinds of writing. I'm a composer, and I'm a visual artist.
My name is Yoko, and other than that, I don't know anything about myself. I think that maybe I exist in the future, and so let's see what happens.
Fluxus concert done by Maciunas was very different from anybody's Fluxus concert. That is to say, he never gave many importance to anybody in it. Everybody had, let's say, 30 seconds, 1 minute to do a piece. He would do a concert with 30 pieces. The curtain comes in, we are seating, we're all four, piece by George Brecht. Then comes in someone with the tuba, bows, and the balls, and the tuba is full of balls, and they roll down. That is a piece by Robert Watts. But now Robert Watts would have liked that piece to be longer. He would say, no, only that shock, 30-second shock, stop. So the only one who really invented the Fluxus concert is Maciunas. And George Brecht accepted the idea, because George Brecht's events wanted to be very small. For instance, one of the most beautiful events by George Brecht, he comes to the piano, he puts his hands on the piano, the place goes dark. In the dark, George Brecht moves away, the lights come, the piano's all alone. Nothing else. And puff, you have the shock. 1 minute, you have a beautiful piece. Then George Brecht comes later on, we do another piece, and puts flowers in the piano. Puff, fantastic.
George Maciunas. Yes.
He had a very narrow face and a pointy nose, and he looked like a puppet of some kind. A puppet whose joint needed fixing, perhaps some more glue.
He was totally important to Fluxus.
George Maciunas. Yes.
Fluxus was his idea.
The most useful work that George did was to bring to performances and to publication many kinds of work that might not have been shown elsewhere.
Maciunas was our ringleader more than he was, say, our Pope, à la Breton.
He was just extremely nice, and he was very industrious, and he was a very good organizer, but we could hardly work together. We could work fine on a personal level, but artistically we couldn't work together at all. It just seemed hopeless.
A very blunt, forceful, aggressive ideologist and organizer for Fluxus. Not a good leader. There's a difference. George was a great organizer and a fine administrator. To be a leader, you have to be able to work with people, to accept their peculiarities, to make a space for them to contribute in their own way. And in the early days, George was not so tolerant and couldn't do that.
August 1st, 1989. Warhol and George, Warhol and Fluxus. Somewhere there, very deep, they were the same. They were both Fluxus. Both dealt essentially with nothingness. Both dismissed the current life, civilization, everything that is being practiced today as everything is the same. Didn't take any of it seriously. Both took life as a game and laughed at it, each in his own way, untouched by themselves, looking at it all from the side or from high above, and creating their own realities that didn't really fit into it.
George was a force in our lives, yes. And to try to conceive of Fluxus without him would be a great mistake.
By 1959, he becomes suddenly very active, mainly because John Cage opens up a school and has all those people coming to the school. Also, the so-called novel realists in France become very active. Plus, Ben Vautier becomes very active. So 1959 is very influential year. We have Namjoon Paik doing first piece. We have Oscar doing first piece. Alan Caprow doing first happenings. We have first poster stamps of Bob Watts. A lot of card music that is written on cards, like of George Brecht. And first sort of concept art of Henry Flynt. Then that goes on through 1960. And Fluxus comes in 1961.
Dick invited me to come stay at his house for a few days. And while I was there, I made for him a reconstruction of a matchbox that I had made a year before, which was just a big Sura box of Fiersticker matches for the kitchen. And I painted it white, and on the outside I wrote, "Open me," and then when you open it, it says, "Shut me quick." And he looked at it and said, "This is a real Fluxus thing. You should take it to George Maciunas." Well, I didn't really know who George was, but Dick had shown me the Fluxus thing, so I said, "Great," because it interested me to meet the guy who was doing this. So I went to see him, and he looked at it. I remember I walked up 5 flights of stairs to his apartment. The apartment belongs to Henry Flynt now. And knocked on the door. All these no smoking signs over the door, and the door opens, and this little guy with funny round glasses looks out, and he says, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm Ken Friedman." And he says, "Yes, come in, come in." And we sat down in his kitchen. One room off to one side I could see was filled with shelves with boxes and little widgets and gadgets and funny things. And the other room had white, straw-colored tatami rice mat on the floor with funny objects where he could touch a thing, and a tool he wanted would float into where he could grab it. And in the kitchen, linoleum floor, black table, simple black chairs, and a refrigerator painted bright orange. And he said, "Would you like some orange juice?" I said, "Yes." He opened the refrigerator, and from the floor of the refrigerator up to the ice chest level, filled with oranges, and then 4-gallon jars of fresh orange juice, half-gallon jars of fresh orange juice on each side of the little ice chest. So he poured me a glass of orange juice, and we talked for a few minutes. And he said, "This is a very nice box." And he asked me, "What do you do?" And I told him what I was doing. And he said, "Would you like to join Fluxus?"
This actually is probably, well, it's, I guess, the last known chart of Maciunas's, where he's trying to establish or trace the development of Fluxus in relation to other avant-garde activities during the time of Fluxus, and also explaining where Fluxus comes from. But it's kind of funny. He starts out with church procession, fantastic art, Versailles, super multimedia spectacles. Then he goes into Walt Disney spectacles, and that kind of ends. Then Roman circuses, medieval fairs, international expositions, world fairs, and that goes down into individualism, he says, which is Paik, Georges Mathieu, Goutai, and then into Paik, Bastel, and things like that.
until then I was composing the kind of straight driving, serious art. A la Schoenberg, Bartok line, world angst, okay? Yeah. Not only me, but everybody, yeah? And it was a heavy scene, heavy. And then I was not that good either, but still I was, that expressionistic attitude. And I am, that's most like in my character, yeah, but in first concert of John Cage, I was not converted by his theory,
Then there are just leading into Fluxus were these two series. One which was at Yoko's loft, which was a series of new music event-like works that Lamont Young had organized with Yoko.
I was doing my work in New York. I had a studio in Chambers Street, and I gave concerts of various people like Lamont Young and Henry Flynt and all the names that you know. And it was a concert series that was attended by many interesting people, like Marcel Duchamp came to, Maciunas came to, and when Marcel Duchamp came, I was hoping that he would notice my paintings. That was the first, I believe, of paintings with instructions, So there's a painting to be stepped on, and I was hoping he would step on it. But I don't think he even noticed it. And I was a shy person, and I would not explain to Duchamp about, well, this is my painting, this is how it's, those things. So I was just looking. Would he step on it, So George found out, and he came to this concert, one of the concerts in Chambers Street Loft, and he decided it's a good idea, and he got a place in the Midtown, in Madison Avenue, and he brought all these artists who did concerts in my loft, and started to do a concert in his gallery. He said, this movement should have a name, so please think of some name, And I said, no, I'm not going to think of any name. And I think it's the next morning or the next morning, George said, I thought of a good name. And he He said, I said, well, what is the name? And he said Fluxus, and he opened the dictionary and showed me what the Fluxus meant. Oh, there are many, many meanings about Fluxus. But one thing that he said, it was so fun, it says flushing, you know, like flushing the toilet. And he laughed about it, and he said, isn't that great, you know? But I was still not sure that all these artists doing work should be considered like a one movement and have a name. But he thought that was a good idea. So it was him who thought of the name Fluxus. And so that's how Fluxus started.
Musik til arbejde. Nu.
There are a number of definitions of Fluxus, and again, they're all equally true.
Now, Fluxus contains event. Event means life. If I take a glass of water and I drink it, that is Fluxus. Now, if I make as if I'm drinking it, that is theater. If I roll into plastic, that is theater and happening. If I shout and do melodrama, that is theater happening, romanticism. But if I drink a glass of water, I think that is life, and that is Fluxus. Fluxus comes out of Duchamp, John Cage, and Zen. And Duchamp brought in the idea of ready-made, John Cage brought in the idea of life, and impersonality, and Zen brought in something else.
It never had as clearly defined a program as if we had all met at a big table and said, okay, now this is our program, this is what we're going to do, and so forth and so on.
Fluxus in America is try to keep on to the impersonality research. Impersonality means non-ego research of John Cage, which did not succeed, but was very interesting as a tentative. Because I don't believe you can do anything non-ego. Man is 100% ego. And even when he becomes a non-egoist, it is pure ego, non-ego. So that you cannot get non-ego, but you can get a new statement on ego, which is non-ego. Complicated, huh?
Fluxus is hard to develop because it is hard to define, and because the people insist on the right to change. After all, Fluxus means change. And it's a rather good name for an art which is devoted to change.
Hold the magnolia seed pod upright in one hand. Examine by scratching the patterned stem. This show is titled Bread and Water, and it's titled that because one day I turned over some homemade bread and I found that it resembled the rivers of the world. This seems a little bit like the Irish Sea. I've looked at a great many atlases to do this performance and this work. And then I collected a table of objects, which I usually do and have for the last 3 of my exhibitions. So I simply apply my other things I'm doing to the handheld object. This is, let's see what this says. It says, rest fingers inside the horns of the squash for a good feeling. So then in doing that, you see we get the sound of the seeds rolling inside. And it actually is a very nice thing to do with a dry squash. So I'm interested in sound, which involves doing a performance. Everything I've done with those objects was a tiny performance that made a sound for me or for you.
A lot of Fluxus is gag-like. That's part of the humor. It's like a gag. In fact, I wouldn't put it in any higher class than a gag. Maybe a good gag.
Really?
Yeah.
You don't consider Fluxus art?
Art form, no. I think it's a good inventive gag.
The piece that Maciunas especially liked was George Brecht's Exit, which is just an exit sign. The score reads exit, out, ut. And Maciunas liked it in that, he described it in the interview with Larry Miller, of how it's a work that we all perform every day. We leave, we go out, we go through the exit, and we perform it without realizing it. It's just an everyday occurrence.
We are trying to do non-art, but non-art cannot exist because it is art. And we are trying to do life art, and life art cannot exist because it is either art or life. And if it's life, it's life. And then nobody knows about it. It's my mother-in-law opening the tap, and she doesn't care. And if she finds out it's drip music by George Brecht, then she starts thinking, and it's art. So you can't get one into the other. It's one and another. And that's important. But I think Fluxus brought up these questions.
In the end of '59 and finished in January 1960, I composed Poem for Chairs, Tables, and Benches, etc., which is a work that is even more involved with my own approach to time structure, in that the work can be any duration, but the sounds are the sounds of chairs, tables, and benches, and really anything that can be dragged across a floor, with an emphasis on getting a really good sound.
When I saw Lamont Young's word pieces, then I began to imitate them, and around that time, I don't know exactly, yes, I think it was after I saw Lamont's word pieces, I did a piece in which you had a human performer and an orchestra that was supposed to be monkeys who were given toy instruments, and they were all in a cage, and the human performer was banging on a kitchen sink with a pipe. And Lamont knew of that piece, and that's when he wanted to do a piece with many repetitions, and so he called it 566 for Henry Flynt, because of my piece, because of banging the sink with a pipe.
I did the piece in April 1960, and it grew out of an improvisation that I was doing with the Ann Halpern Dance Company in California. Later, I titled it, and the correct title is Arabic numeral any integer to Henry Flynt. Then, when you put it on a program, you determine the number of strokes that you're going to do.
Then it goes from there into Fluxus festivals. And this is how Maciunas used the chart to see the flow of things, kind of the flowing down. Some things lead off to sort of periphery or to dead ends, he might feel. But with Fluxus, these two series, you can see, lead right into the Fluxus festivals. Here he's saying that his series leads right in, but you could equally say that the series at Yoko's Loft leads right into the Fluxus festivals, which, as you've probably already discussed, started in Wuppertal in '62 and then went on to Dusseldorf, Paris, Wiesbaden, Copenhagen, and so on.
George Maciunas was sort of trying to get involved in the avant-garde in New York in early 1961. And he had an art gallery on Madison Avenue. And he met Lamont Young and Jackson McLough, and he was doing series of evenings in his art gallery on Madison Avenue. And there was a series that was Lamont Young and Jackson McLough chose the people who were in the series. They produced it. I guess that's what you would say. They were the producers.
At the time that George Maciunas met me, he was a very nice person, you know, and he was very helpful to me when I was starving. He would give me food. George didn't know anything about what was going on in art or music or anything. He just had totally conventional ideas.
Then he had to leave for Europe, and the anthology. I mean, you know, here we have Jackson McLough standing right here.
Then the next thing we heard at the end of the year, at least I did, I think other people had other kinds of things, were that we were all editors of something called Fluxus, which was first projected as a series of anthologies, I think modeled probably upon Lamont's anthology. And, I've forgotten who was what, but I was first appointed literary editor, and then in a later version of his lists, I was the poetry editor. And so during '62 and '63, he had a number of, he began to have concerts, festivals as he called them, Fluxus festivals, beginning with Wiesbaden.
Patterson and I were doing a piece of his, I forget the title now, but it involved a ladder, and on this ladder there were steaming tea kettles, and on the spouts to the tea kettles there were balloons which were swelling up, and we had started practicing dart throwing in connection with a piece by a Japanese composer Ishiyanagi, and we would throw the darts into the backboard of a piano, and the sound was startling. But in this particular piece, we would wait until the balloons expanded, and then we would pop the balloons, and there would be a pop, you know.
And there were some very provocative, slow performances. Not all Fluxus pieces are short. Some of them are very, very provocative in terms of time. I would say Fluxus is often, at least the early Fluxus, very focused on time. Sometimes the pieces are extremely short and sometimes extremely long. And at the Copenhagen Fluxus, both kinds were represented. I remember one long section where Emmet Williams and Eric Andersen were on the stage, each waiting for the other to move. Nobody moved, and after about 45 minutes, mysteriously the performance ended. But of course, theoretically, it could have gone on till now.
I found myself, with the second performance of Make a Salad, confronted with all these angry dames. Especially angry was the head of the music school, who had actually funded the vegetables for the salad, probably thinking I was going to make something in a little bowl. And instead, I prepared salad for hundreds of people.
I found the Copenhagen audience pretty nice after, say, what happened in Wiesbaden, where people hated this and put signs up, you know, they went over our posters and would send them to the nut house, you know, and they really were hostile.
Of course, a piece like that is hard for any audience at that time, because to consider making the salad to be a work of art is simply not a perception that most people are ready for.
We were going to try to do my whipped cream piece, which I called Lick. I don't know if you know, it's a very simple score. It says just cover a shapely woman nude with whipped cream. And then the next instruction is lick, right? And Adi Koch had managed to get the Danish Dairy Association to donate gallons and gallons of whipped cream. And then he thought he had somebody organized to be the woman, and then she began to think about it and said no. And I remember the whole day, you know, he goes through all of the friends, and then he goes through his little black book. He starts calling all the other numbers, and even the prostitutes said no, which I thought was very strange, because Copenhagen in those days was supposed to be the wide open city of Europe. So we didn't manage to do it there.
The time that these pieces appeared is so vastly different from the times we're in now that you will not. The concept of audience, which we have now, was very different from what it was then. So for us, it's extremely interesting to see how these very simple works, minimal works, reflect the audience as well as ourselves.
This is 80 Worcester Street, where in 1967 George established the first cooperative, which was the beginning of Soho. Now George, Cinematheque, filmmaker Cinematheque took the ground floor and the basement, but also George lived for between 67 and 77 practically. For 10 years he lived in the basement here also. Did all his work. This was the Fluxus. This tree that you're seeing, that tree there, George planted them. They were tiny, tiny little trees, but they grew up, as you can see. And the police and the city people came in the morning and they said, oh, it's forbidden to have trees on this street. It's industrial street. And George said, if you don't like them, you uproot them yourself. I'm not going to do. You uproot it yourself. And they went, and they never came back. And the trees are here.
It's based on a work that Brecht had done in the 50s, 1959, called Valoch, which is French slang for travel, a thing like what you pack, a backpack, or what you carry with you when you go traveling. And it was a work that Maciunas became fascinated with, and they went through different forms. Usually, after the initial ones came in an antique box, and it, in a metaphoric sense, is perhaps what you would travel with to another world, either to a world of your childhood or a world after death. So it contains things that are round, things that are wooden. This is driftwood, which you might find at the beach. Children's things, toys, that sort, top, another kind of top that would spin. A toy snake. It's a Fluxus work by George Brecht, but George Brecht gave the idea over to Maciunas to realize, not in the sense of the old master artist doing a design for a printmaker to realize, but entrusting Maciunas to realize the work. And so that what is here might be what Brecht would have put in, but it might be quite different. One of the ideas behind Fluxus was to try to get away from the individualism that was prevalent in the art world at the time, and towards collectivism and anonymity of authorship to an experience, just to the experience itself. And that's demonstrated here a little bit by the idea that Maciunas is making Brecht's work.
I don't consider it an art form. There's no aim to it, there's no purpose, it doesn't have a function, it's not convincing anybody, it's not trying to gain ground, it's not trying to become a success or to change the world. It just takes place.
Total chaos, total order, total disorder, total freedom, random, everything can happen, and you know, and the other extreme.
27, 24, 21, 18.
Fluxus minimalism, a kind of essentialism, non-objectified.
If you go to a museum, you have seen it all before, huh? Isn't it? I mean, any museum, and I don't go to museums much, but any museum I enter, I see the same shit everywhere. It's like as if I go into McDonald's. I know exactly what I'm going to get.
We had all of this painting would disappear, and ballet would disappear, and so forth and so on. But it was kind of an attempt to combine the, you know, this is almost like, this is your life, you know, and now you're, Ben is walking up just as I'm about to mention you.
Fluxus contains attitude. That is to say, we don't only produce objects, like bronzes or Armands or New Realism or pop art produces objects. We have an attitude towards art. Hello, Eric. We have an attitude towards art, and that attitude is in, let's say, I decide on not being an artist, or suiciding, or drinking, or not even drinking, or we look at art and then we try to change our mind towards it.
It seems that everything that art touches dies.
February 11, 1978. To be aware of approaching death is one thing. To accept death is another thing. But George has accepted living with death in a perfect Fluxus spirit. He has been used to death all his life. He says he's so full of medicine and drugs and cortisone that the bugs do not bite him. And those bugs that bite him drop dead immediately. Already in 1960, doctors gave him only a few months to live, but he's still around, George, doing his art. George is not using his body to make art. There isn't much of it left. There never was. He's using his life.
At one time, I thought truth would change art. See, I said now art is a big lie somewhere, because if you take any painting and you scratch behind it, you find ego. So I thought that just behind any painting we can put, please look at me. So why should I draw like Rembrandt or Giotto or Botticelli? I just write what they really want to say, please look at me. I have done this, please look at me. So I thought my way of painting would be to tell the truth on a painting. So I can write, for instance, please look at me, or just this painting is 5 meters long or 2 meters. That could be one kind of truth compared, you see. So I had objective truth and subjective truth. That was my kind of work. But when I tell you I don't believe so much in myself, it's true. Because after all, it was easy.
I don't consider myself as an artist that strives in one profession or one field. I'd like to think that I have the freedom to choose the media whenever I want to, which media, what media I want to, and just use it to communicate my ideas or message.
True that I was classically trained as a composer, and I enjoyed that a lot. But I never saw music as a kind of profession or way of expression or anything like that that is normally understood by being a composer. It was very natural that I didn't stick to sounds only. My very first pieces dealt also with visual phenomena and with the process of playing itself, that you try to integrate all the aspects of the performance situation into the single work. So I wouldn't say that I ever wrote a music piece in a classical sense. I wrote a lot of pieces and still do write works for instruments and for orchestral situations. But I never really wrote a piece of music.
The piano activities itself was actually not designed to destroy a piano with. That, for instance, was not the original intention. As a matter of fact, I was quite shocked when I heard about it. It gave me a lot of pause to think about it. It was definitely a kinetic piece. The idea was that there were roles, which were verbally defined, which was a way of limiting the activity. You don't just take a baseball bat and smash the piano to pieces, but you use it as a way of provoking many different effects and a variety, richness of texture and interest. In any case, my work has always been involved in piano activity, certainly was with taking the quote-unquote chaos of a large, multiply conceived situation and giving it some kind of shape, some kind of coherence, some kind of order, some kind of purpose.
The greatest experience in music is making it yourself. When you're in the audience and hearing it, you only get maybe 50% of the total experience, because there's a lot of it which is just in the kinetic, physical thing of, striking the piano or playing the thing and keeping the time going in your head. All of that is very fulfilling experience. So the attempt was to somehow or other make a piece or work or a whole opus of work which anyone could be a performer and work with the thing without having to go to music school for 30 years, and start at the age of 6 or something like that. So that piece was a paper piece. And I was looking for an instrument or something or other that anybody could play. And then suddenly it was paper, right? And so with paper you can tear it or shake it or crumple it or rumple it or bumple and blow up paper bags and squash them. And for better or for worse, it became one of the classic Fluxus pieces, which was performed at all the concerts around the world. I heard of later that there was a performance for Japanese television that lasted 6 hours, which I thought was very nice. But that piece really did, in a way, everything that I wanted to do. And it's almost been an anticlimax since then.
As mothers tell their daughters, never give anything away. And just collectors who collect stuff and keep it for years and years and years suddenly find that the junk has value, And what is an antique shop except something that they're full of something, some few things that didn't get thrown away and should have been thrown away. But I don't think you can do that with art.
What you get here, the real Fluxus works that you might see is leftovers of a party. It's like going into a room and you see all the dirty tables and you say, oh, that's it. It isn't it. It's a leftover of it. You might as well clean it up and start another party.
People used to throw things at us and burn up our scores as we were holding them and, get out of here. And now you go to something called a Fluxus performance, and the ladies in fur coats, and and if you cough, they applaud, and then they buy what's left over as residual objects, and it's sitting at the same theater. It has no feeling of Fluxus as not only a non-establishment thing, but an anti-establishment force.
Anybody who claims, who cuts up a poem with scissors, or who takes a paintbrush and throws it on the wall or something like that, that's nostalgia. That's nostalgia. There's no more avant-garde. I mean, we made the most radical criticism that you can make.
Fluxus is an attempt which will never succeed. Fluxus is not a hypocritical attempt, but it is an idealistic attempt to pass the Duchamp situation, and we cannot. because we are in a formal mess. We can do anything we want since Duchamp, but we can't pass Duchamp because there's no shock. Everything is accepted. So the only way to pass Duchamp would be not to become an artist. But not to become an artist on purpose is being an artist, so that is very complicated.
I would really pity anyone who didn't know the difference between art and life. And I participate in these ideas of art and life as some kind of a metaphor, yes, but, you know, my brain isn't that lame, you know, I really do know the difference.
True, but some people say that Fluxus starts tomorrow.
Well, I said a long time ago that it had never been invented yet.
And you want to invent it? That's what you're trying to do?
No, I was hoping that when it finally took place, I would be a part of it.
And it didn't take place.
Well, something is taking place in these old warehouses here, but it looks more like a painting show than Fluxus exhibition, as far as I'm concerned.
We are very proud of now associate as Flux member or former Flux member, president of a small country. This Landsbergis, huh? And then, but he really changed the world, okay? And Saudis is his name of underground company, political organization, Saudis, which he had as the descent, for a long time. Saudis in Lithuania changed Lithuania, and he was the toughest guy, so Gorbachev couldn't break. Remember, even as late as 1 year ago, just from Iran-Iraq war, they sent tank in, So he almost died many times, but he survived, okay? With the humor. And Saudis, what his original name of a party, means in Lithuanian Fluxus. So he did have a Fluxus party. It changed Lithuania and changed the Soviet Union and changed the world. So indeed, Flux little finger made, no artist organization made such a big positive change. A negative positive, it's a positive change.